Material Differences, Chapter 8, Part 1, Echoes in the Dust. We haven't traveled this much in a long time. Jaeger glanced over at Raven as she said that. Is that a bad thing? He asked. No, just noticed. She shrugged and then looked back down at the tablet she'd gotten from Cov. You're fine with having Max get that lost hauler for those people on his own? He's not exactly on his own. Bertha and Tex are both going to be watching him, and those are the best bots we have. Not to mention a handful of others, Jaeger reminded her. Do you talk to Bertha much? She seemed wistful lately. Nostalgic, maybe? Jaeger frowned as Raven said that and looked over at her. You talk to Bertha regularly? He asked with a bit of surprise. I try to make time for all the bots. The ones who talk back, I mean. She mentioned, which did sound like something she'd do. You should talk to her. When you get some free time, I mean. We've been busy lately. Well, it's been an eventful week, that's for sure. He nodded in agreement. Having that recon satellite crash so close reminded me of the bigger world around us. I already had planned on heading into town for meat, but swinging by and helping your DJ friend was just a happy coincidence. Have his broadcasts been interesting lately? Jaeger asked, trying to sound casual in his interest. Yeah. He thanked us, though not by name. Just said some capable fans had stopped by to help him patch up his station. Used it as a sort of piece about helping out neighbors. She said with a somewhat distracted tone as she was playing some sort of game on her tablet. I'm glad you won't be bored on road trips now, but you're a bit lacking in the conversation department suddenly. Jaeger mentioned, and as Raven just kept tapping at her game, he couldn't help but chuckle. What? His chuckle made her glance over and he just shook his head. Having fun with that? He asked instead. Yeah. Thanks again for getting it for me, she said, and then kept tapping. They were winding their way through the hills that separated the coast on their way to Hams. Most traffic crossing the hills would use the highway out from Splitstream, but they were taking the old Skyline Scenic Road. It used to be popular for executives who lived in the cliffs overlooking the city to use on their way to their rustic rural cabins in the valley. Rustic rural cabins that were 3 stories tall with 8 bedrooms, a pool, and often VTOL pads. They could still see the husks of many of these cabins as they drove by along the road. Every so often they'd spot one that actually looked like it was in use. The gardens, tennis courts, and well-kept lawns having been turned into fields of various crops. His favorite was actually one near a small lake that once had extensive pools and decorative streams that had been turned into a cultivation farm for all sorts of water plants. Stuff like caramel berries had been an expensive treat even before the war, so he had no idea what a crop of them went for these days. It was good to see that people were making a go of survival just about everywhere. There were certainly less people up here than down in the valley or on the coast, but he suspected what they lacked in communities they made up for in privacy and isolation. They'd be in trouble if any scavs decided to head up from the city, though. The packed garrisons were fairly sparse as it was, but to get up into the hills would take even longer. What mostly saved them was the fact that scavs weren't usually interested in isolated farms. He doubted the local farmers were unarmed either, which helped. Despite the potential risk, he could also understand why people liked to stay up here. It was what had drawn the executives to build their weekend getaways up here in the first place. Look west in the right spot and you get to see the coast and the ocean beyond it stretching out before you. Look east in the right place and you have the Central Valley rolling before you. The valley was where the real agriculture was. Orchards, farms, ranches as far as the eye could see. Depending on the season and what crop was out, it could also be extremely vivid in a wide variety of colors. Though there was less variety than there used to be, there was still plenty. Hey! He reached over to tap Raven's shoulder to get her attention before he pointed. There's the spire. That got her to perk up and shift in her seat to look out ahead of them. Ahead and to the right of their path, far in the distance, was the spire, as it was known. Unlike so many buildings from before the war that had fallen into disrepair and become run down, the spire was still a gleaming icon of sophistication and technology. Finished only a few years before the outbreak of the war, it was designed as a massive agricultural sciences complex in the valley, and more importantly now, was also a hub for freighter traffic on this side of the continent. Look! There's 3 of them today! Raven gasped out as they could see the massive freighters hanging in the air as they began to settle down into the ship cradles arranged around the base of the spire. These were big freighters, too. "That's the Cristaldi." He pointed to one of them with a particularly bright red, white, and green paint scheme, unlike the other two, which were far more worn and weathered. Used to be the pride of the Antaran Union. Still a little odd to see it here. But I guess what's left of the Union is part of the Pact, so they go where needed. When it launched, a lot of people expected it to be a repeat of the Vanto. "The Vanto?" Raven asked. Biggest freighter at the time made by the Milanese stellar artisans. Most Antaran naval contracts went to Reiter Industrial Schiffswerven, or the ever-popular Blohm, Voss, and Maersk. The Milanese shipyards were, as implied by the name, far more concerned with fancy ships. They felt that their competitors lacked style, sophistication, and fashion, which is honestly true enough, but their competitors' ships were also known for being reliable, inexpensive, and practical, so they wanted to show off and build something really impressive. That was the Vanto, he explained as they drove. "What happened to it?" she asked next, keeping her eyes off her tablet for a bit. Well, the Vanto was bigger than anything they'd made before by a large margin. All kinds of project issues. Way over budget, well behind schedule, and well short of desired efficiency goals. But being a matter of pride, it launched as soon as they could. They cut so many corners it was practically a sphere. One of the corners cut was its close-impact defense system. What did they need to worry about meteors for? Especially on its first voyage that was just from Nuovo Milan to Giardino and then Concordia. "Oh no," she muttered, seeing where this was going. Oh yes. So in the midst of the Scorpio star lane, a freak meteor storm came out of the void, tore it to shreds, right in the middle of the busiest Antaran star lane and one of the busiest star lanes out there. He shook his head slowly. Thankfully, since it was so busy, there were surprisingly few casualties, because at least they didn't skimp on escape pods. It fueled a lot of jokes about Italian engineers having so much fire and passion for their work. Their designs often ended in fiery, passionate explosions. Or rather just fed more fuel to those old jokes. "Then, how'd the Cristaldi come about?" she asked as she looked up at the freighter. Well, at the very least, the Milanese knew how to learn from their mistakes. Rather than wallow in shame, they immediately set to work repairing their reputation. The Cristaldi, named after their founder, was the answer. He nodded to the massive freighter hanging in the sky as he tried to remember the stats. The Cristaldi is a scaled-down but vastly improved Vanto. It's 400 meters long, 50 at the beam, and 75 draft. So just imagine how big the Vanto was compared to it. They kept that stylish swept bridge, though. The Cristaldi was, or I suppose is pretty lavish as far as freighters go, but expensive. The rest of the ones they made for the line are the same size, but they cut back on luxuries to make them more affordable. Still nicer than just about any other freighters, I hear. No idea how their mechanics feel about them, though. Milanese ships were always maintenance-heavy. He shrugged. "Think they're traveling in a convoy?" she asked then, as the three freighters prepared to settle down around the spire. Has to be. I doubt that 3 super freighters would just show up at the exact same time out of coincidence. He shrugged. Solavis, despite having a smaller population than most Agri worlds does, output a great deal of food. The FVS was big on automation and efficiency, after all. "Think they're still using the spire for research, too?" she asked as she looked at the white tower. They could see the greenhouses beyond it and several small enclosures of trees at the base. "I'm sure of it. Used to be about making more exotic or tasty fruits and veggies, but now I'll bet it's about hardiness, making crops that can grow anywhere. I think transportation is still the biggest issue these days," he suggested. Raven watched until all 3 freighters had settled before looking back down at her tablet. Seeing the freighters in the sky was cool. Watching them get unloaded from several kilometers away wasn't. They weren't too far from their destination now, though. Ham's salvage yard was set up overlooking the spire for a reason. The hills ahead of them on the road soon became more rocky and treacherous. Used to be called the Broken Spine, though he wasn't sure if locals still called it that, or cared. The main road here turned east to switch back down into the valley, but he wasn't going that way. Instead, Jaeger drove them forward at an old junction and onto a dirt and gravel road. Once they rounded the first bend came the warning signs. Dangerous wildlife, unstable cliffs, rogue bots, beware falling rocks. There were all kinds of warning that he ignored before coming up to a barbed wire fence that closed off a large salvage yard beyond. Unlike the junkyard near the compound that was mostly scrap from the war itself, this one was more organized and far bigger. Yeager just waited at the gate and waved up at the camera watching the road. After a minute, the gate slowly rolled open with a whine. Sounded like the motor needed work. The fence as well, since it looked like a strong breeze would topple over sections of it. But that was just part of the cover. Make a large state-of-the-art fence topped with turrets and patrol it with bots and you'll get all kinds of attention. But a rusty old fence and some old broke-down hulks, especially this far out in the middle of nowhere, no one would look twice. Yeager drove them towards the old control tower at the center of it all. The only bit of pavement in the whole area was the old landing strip some of the craft needed. Not everything was a VTOL after all. All around them were ships, VTOLs, repulsors, and all manner of flying craft in various states of dismantling and salvage. Some of it dated back to the first planetary settlements, practically steam-powered by modern standards. They came to a stop just next to the control tower then, and the small workshop and barracks built into the face of a cliff. As they got out of the car, Ham stepped out of the workshop still wearing his usual overalls, stained with grease and some burn marks. He was wiping his hands off on a cloth as they got out of the car. "What a nice surprise," he remarked as Raven quickly ran up for a hug. He draped the cloth over his shoulder and leaned down so he could grab her as she jumped up for the hug and spin her around in the air for a moment, as she squealed happily before he set her down. "My, you've grown," he remarked, which made her laugh. "No, I haven't. I don't grow again until my birthday," she replied with a giggle. "And you never grow at all." She waved at him as he laughed and shrugged. Ham was average height for humans, but very skinny, and always clean-shaven, so it gave him an even smaller and younger appearance. "You know, we were just talking about names the other day. How Max is medium assault prototype and all that. It made me think back to when I first got to meet you. That I actually remember, I thought with your name you'd be like, heavy assault mech and be this big guy." She raised her arms up and out, which made him laugh. "Ah, no, not me. Besides, mechs are empty. They need pilots," he reminded her. "Well, I know that now," she huffed. Yeager chuckled a little himself and shook his head as he walked closer. "Nah." "Ham's name is what you would call an ironic nickname." Yeager nodded. "Ironic he glanced at Raven. "Ironic my butt," he replied with a glare which just made Yeager laugh harder. "What's so funny?" Raven asked with a frown as she looked between them. "Just after training when we were all official Revenant and a pilot." Yeager started. "I'm still technically a Revenant," Ham reminded him. "Technically?" Yeager wiggled a hand as if it were iffy, which made Ham roll his eyes. "After training when the core team was first assembled, we were sitting around talking one day, discussing what sort of call signs we'd like or what would be cool, stuff like that. So then we're going around the room and I look over and see this guy in the corner reading. The nerd," Ham snorted at that. "And I ask him what sort of call sign he'd like, trying to include him into the group, and he doesn't even look up. He just says, 'Ham.'" Ham smiled even as he said it. So we look at each other in confusion and I just say to him, "What?" "Ham," because I don't get it. Yeager smirked as he said it. And he replies, "Ham and cheddar, on rye." Ham slowly nodded as he repeated his fateful words from so long ago. Raven looks entirely confused at this point, even as Yeager and Ham both chuckle. So obviously I'm confused then too. I ask what kind of call sign that is, and he finally looks up now also confused. Yeager continued. "I thought we were ordering lunch," Ham gasped out as he tossed his hands in the air. They all start laughing at me, which gets me all flustered, and I can't think of a way out of it. All concept of call signs and nicknames just flees from my mind. Gone. He shakes his head slowly. Then when it comes time for actual call signs, guess what name I've magically been given? He gave Yeager a dirty look, but Yeager just laughed and smiled back. Ham ever since. He shrugged. It really never made sense to me, Ham replied. I'm thin, tidy, and quiet. Not exactly the sort of person you envision when you hear Ham. Like I said, it's ironic. It fit too well. Yeager smirked at that and sighed as he thought back on those first years in the program. So, how was it? Yeager and Ham both looked at Raven as she said that. Ham then looked to Yeager as if to ask what she was talking about, but all Yeager could do was shrug, since he wasn't sure either. The ham with cheddar on rye. As she said that, both men laughed, and Ham just shook his head. I really don't remember. Good, I assume. Though now its memory has turned bitter considering what name I was cursed with forevermore. He rolled his shoulders then and looked off at nothing for a moment, obviously thinking back on those old days just like Yeager. Then he focused on Yeager in the present. So what brings you two by? I'm always happy for company, but I wasn't expecting it. We found a RaveX recon satellite, Raven said before Yeager had a chance. We thought you'd like its core to watch the traffic around the planet. You managed to get the core without it self-destructing? Ham asked, obviously impressed. Packed retrofit, Yeager explained as Ham nodded. Well, still, that's very good work. I'm guessing you were the one who did all the work? He asked as he looked at Raven. Your dad's good at smashing them to bits, but he's not very good at taking them apart carefully now, is he? Hey, I resemble that statement. Yeager shot back, which made them all chuckle a little. It's in the back. As he turned to walk to the back of the car, he froze. Down the road the way they came was perhaps the largest pink puma he'd ever seen. The pink puma were native Salavian animals that bore a very striking similarity to cougars on Earth. There was also a subspecies with a coat best evolved to blend in with the reddish and pink hues of the more arid, rocky geography found at this end of the continent, hence the name. Though they also had some browns and cream-colored striped and patterns, the pink was most prominent. While most of the Salavian cats were at most as big as an adult human, this one was easily 2.5 meters long, 1.5 meters at the shoulder, and likely around 150 kilograms if Yeager was viewing it right. But they were ambush predators. Why was one just standing in the road staring at him? Ham, please tell me you have a gun on you, he quietly whispered back. Oh, sorry! He walked forward then and whistled out as the puma slowly began to tread closer. Don't worry, she's not real. Well, she is, but she's a synth. Yeager, Raven, I'd like you two to meet Artemis. Ham walked forward as the cat leaned up to headbutt him gently in the chest as he rubbed her cheeks. A synth animal? Raven gasped out. Artemis? The ancient god of hunting? Isn't that name sort of lazy? Yeager asked. Look, I had to change it to something else. For some stupid reason, the original project had nothing but stupid names for her, like Genghis Cat, Catmando, Catastrophe, Megabyte, and Catnip. Those names are terrible, Ham insisted only for Yeager to shoot back. Says Ham, which caused him to glare at Yeager, but Raven giggled. I love all those names, even if most of them are sort of aggressive. Even as she said that, the synth puma padded over to Raven, leaning up to nuzzle against her, as Raven quickly began to scratch the puma's cheeks and chin. Ooh, you're just a big sweetie, aren't you, Catnip? Why Catnip? Why would a cat be called Catnip? That doesn't make sense, Ham huffed out. Says the man named after a ham sandwich, Yeager narrated as Ham in turn glared at him once more. Though as he watched Raven pet the giant cat, something clicked in his mind. Is this what we got out of the ruins on Syria? He asked. Yeah. Ham nodded then. This was the big project you had us drag out of there? A synth cat? He asked, somewhat surprised. Yep. Ham nodded once more. How come this took so long to fix up? I thought you were working on a special fighter or something. There was a lot of stuff we brought back. Yeager mentioned his thought back to the trips they took up to the moon, and to an old Absolute Dynamics research station. We brought back a lot of things. This was one of them, and it took a while because honestly the project was a mess. It didn't have much funding through the war since it wasn't really going to be effective for the issues we had then. The technical aspects worked fine. It just needed a lot of help meshing together organic thought processes with programming. He nodded at the cat still affectionately nuzzling Raven. Quite a bit of trial and error, Ham added. How many times did she eat your hand? Yeager asked, knowing what Ham meant by trial and error. More than I'd have liked, but less than I feared, Ham admitted. That's such a non-answer. Jaeger commented only for Ham to simple shrug and smirk at him. She's totally awesome, Raven mentioned then. But why do you have her? We salvaged her on Syria. You remember that, right? Jaeger said, surprised she hadn't heard him ask Ham about it. No, not literally why does he have her. I mean, like, what's the point of having a synth puma? She clarified. For the record, I understood right away, Ham replied as Jaeger rolled his eyes. And it's to keep people away. This is a salvage yard. Most people are going to ignore it, especially up here. But sometimes people might think it's easier to steal parts than buy them. So I post signs all over about a giant puma and let there be some sightings at nearby farms. Then people are worried about a giant monster puma and don't wander around. But don't you have bots? She asked with a frown. Ah, but this isn't like your compound. Everyone knew that was an absolute dynamics facility. That alone keeps people out. This was covert, so people don't know. If I had bots patrolling the place, word would get out real quick. Giant puma. At worst, I get some nature types up here telling me I shouldn't disturb their natural habitat and try to lecture me about animal rights and whatever. The way he said that and had a look in his eyes made Jaeger arch a brow. Did you have her eat them? He asked. No, though I wanted to. Just had her scare them off. I'm sure afterward they both said to themselves that cat really did make me puma pants. He wiggled his eyebrows at his little joke as Jaeger just snorted. That pun really doesn't work. Jaeger shook his head, trying to deny his own chuckle. Ah, what would you know? Ham retorted with a scoff.